Okay, the recording has now started.
Okay, it is now 7:04 p.m. This is the 9th of March 2022 meeting of the Trail, Sidewalks and Bikeways Committee. To conduct the meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by the FOIA and the emergency ordinance, this committee needs to make certain findings and determinations. For the record, it is a bit cumbersome, so I ask you to in advance for your patience. First, because each member of the committee is participating in the meeting from a separate location, we must verify that a quorum of members is participating and each member's voice is clear, audible, and at an appropriate volume for all of the other members. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call and ask each committee member participating in this meeting to state your name and the location from which you are participating. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each of your colleagues. Following this roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear from every other member. I am the representative at large and chair, Ken Comer, calling from Springfield. Braddock District, Bob Cosgrove.
This is Bob Cosgrove, Braddock District Rep and Vice Chair. I'm calling from my home in Fairfax.
Hunter Mill, Alex Rowe. No response. Mount Vernon District, Jim Klein. I thought I saw his name.
You did. It's on.
Okay, must have dropped.
I think he's under a guest. He might not have been able to unmute.
Yeah, he's
listed.
Now. Yeah, I just promoted him again.
I'm back. I don't like Microsoft Teams. I'm just registering my complaint right here now.
right. We hear that loud and clear.
All right.
The purpose. Drainsville District. I haven't updated my list. I have Wade Smith. Who's our new Drainsville representative?
Hi, I'm Lydia, the new Drainsville representative, calling in from my home in Herndon, and happy to be here.
Thank you, Lydia. Welcome. Providence District. Do we have a new representative from Providence? And no response. Mason District, Mr. Albright. We got to rely on somebody else to monitor the list to see if these folks are muted or not here, because I can only show one thing on my screen at a time. So no response from James Albright. Springfield District, Carl Liebert.
Okay, it's Carl Ebert representing the Springfield District from my home in Burke.
Thanks, Carl. Hear you. Lee District, Aaron Partland. Sully District, Karen Empa. So no response from Lee, no response from Sully. Clifton Horse Society, Katie McDaniel.
Katie McDaniel calling from my home in Oak Hill, and I love Microsoft Teams.
Thank you, Katie. I'm sure we'll get used to it. Fab, Sean Newman.
Evening, everybody. Sean Newman calling from Fairfax County.
Fairfax area, thank you, Sean. Fairfax Area Disability Services Board. Do we have a representative?
Still vacant, Ken.
Fairfax County Federation of Citizens Associations, Mark Tipton.
Hi, this is Mark Tipton calling from my office in Rockville.
Fairfax County Park Authority, Beth.
This is Beth Ionetta calling from my home in city of Fairfax.
Thank you. Hear you. Northern Virginia Builders Industry Association, Soledad Portilla. No response. Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority, Mike Depew. And Washington Area Bicyclists Association, Howard Albers.
Howard Albers, calling from my home in Fairfax.
Thank you, Howard. Hear you. I move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of the committee. It is our practice to approve this and all subsequent motions by acclamation, so I will now ask if there are any objections or nay votes. Hearing none, the motion carries. Second, having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures, the fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for public access to the meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for the committee to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting, and that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of this committee and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely and practically. I further move that this committee may conduct this meeting electronically through Microsoft Teams platform. This format will also provide a dedicated phone line. The public may access the meeting by going to www.fairfaxcounty.gov/transportation/trails and entering event number 234-978-345 and password trails 2021. By calling 1-844-621-3956 and using access code 234-978-345. It is so moved. I will again ask if there are any objections or nay votes. Hearing none, the motion carries. Finally, it is next required to establish that all of the matters addressed in today's agenda address the emergency itself, are necessary for continuity in Fairfax County government, and or are statutorily required for necessary to continue operations in the discharge of this committee's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved. I will again ask if there are any objections or nay votes. Hearing none, that motion carries. And we now are in a position to begin our agenda. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our new members. Before we start the agenda, I want to ask, first of all, if there are any members of the public that I have not, whose names I have not called, that we might make arrangements to hear from you. Okay, so we'll have to monitor the chat to make sure that there isn't somebody muted or somebody attempting to get through, but we've heard at this point, no members of the public. Finally, could staff please identify yourselves? Who's here tonight?
This is Nicole Winans with FCDOT.
Thanks, Nicole.
And this is Lauren Delmar, also with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Lauren. And did you know if there was anybody else who was going to attend? Is that?
I think that's all from our organization.
Austin Gastrell, Department of Planning and Development. I'm presenting tonight with Mike Davis on Parking Reimagined.
Ah, okay. I'm sorry, let's have the name again.
Austin Gastrell, and I'm with Department of Planning and Development.
Thanks, Austin. Welcome. And I've heard Mike here. So Michael Davis, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Michael Davis with the Department of Land Development Services, and I'm also here for the Parking Reimagined presentation.
Okay, great. We're going to get to you guys shortly as soon as we get to our minutes. Are there anybody who has not yet been identified who is attending the meeting and needs to be on the record? Nothing heard. Okay, so next item on the agenda are the minutes, and I'm going to turn the floor over to our secretary, Beth, to go through the list of, because she knows everything that's been sent out, and she'll be able to lead the discussion on changes to them one at a time. I think you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that correct?
That is correct. So tonight, I'm happy to report that we are caught up from all of our meeting minutes for the last pandemic meetings we've been having. The last ones that were sent out most recently were July 2021, September 2021, November and December, and then January from this year. We obviously didn't have February, so I did not receive any comments or corrections from anybody when I previously sent them out in early February or end of January, and then I believe David sent them out again prior to this meeting, and I still haven't seen anything. Does anyone have any corrections or additions or edits to note in the minutes you may have reviewed? I'll take your silence as no, and so I will make a motion to approve the minutes as stated. Can I have a second? Or not?
Second.
Motion's been moved and seconded. Does anyone have an objection to approval? I'm trying to copy Mr. Ken Comer without a script. Seeing and hearing none, the minutes have been approved for July, September, November, December, and January. Thank you.
That was easier than it normally is. Okay. Thank you very much. And on to the next item of the agenda. And I'll let you folks go through the, Michael, Mike, I'll let you go through the, trying to get the presenter thing. So the floor is over to you, and you might need some help from the host. Over.
I'm gonna see if this works.
Yeah, so I stopped sharing, so you should be able to share.
Okay. All right, can everyone see that?
Yeah, you're good.
Yes, we're good.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your interest in parking in the Parking Reimagined project. An examination of our off-street auto parking regulations in the county zoning ordinance is long overdue. As will be described in the presentation, human behavior, land development, technology, and other factors have changed auto parking demand, and the parking that is supplied for this should adapt to these changes. Parking should not be a given, but instead should be considered a land resource that competes with other values when land is developed. The project continues with public engagement, and staff is seeking your input and perspectives on parking. This feedback is essential in our examination of parking and developing our project priorities. Your comments and conversations tonight will provide important background for the project. Most people own one or more vehicles and take for granted that they will be able to park these vehicles in their travels. Most of the time, people don't generally think about parking unless they can't find a convenient spot or there's an unexpected number of vehicles parked near their home. Yet parking is everywhere around us. Most every land use in the county requires some parking. When people drive and park, they're focused on finding a convenient space. They don't often notice the gray empty edges that rarely have any vehicles parked there. A key purpose of our project is to have people think about parking a little differently, to begin to think of it as a resource. And when you do that, you begin to consider the importance of that resource relative to other important elements that we all care about, such as the environment, affordability, and land design. When parking has a community value, then you can think about how that value should be weighed against other initiatives. Parking is a land use, just like residences, office buildings, and shopping centers. This project intends to imagine how best to utilize that land resource. While the county is moving toward multimodal development that encourages more transportation options such as walking, biking, and transit, driving is and will remain a common activity. This, of course, will require us to park these vehicles. Therefore, providing parking with land use activities will still be necessary. This project recognizes that parking will continue to be supplied. However, it's important that parking be sized to the average demand for it. The term that was created for this is right-sizing parking, which is to not underbuild or overbuild parking supply for a land use. While we strive to right-size parking and requirements, we also know there are places and uses that present parking challenges. This project will take in that information as well and look for ways to address those areas. Here I'll provide background information on some elements of parking that hopefully gives some insight on the operation of and influences on parking and the role these play in considering changes to the requirements. Parking has times of high and low demand. This can occur by the hour, day, month, or year. People know that during the holiday season, more people are out shopping, and this increases parking demand. In January and February, less people are shopping and parking is freely available. While there can be times when it is difficult to find a parking space, parking should be constructed to address average demand. Within the county, there are places where you need a car for almost any activity beyond your home, and there are places where there are options that don't require a car. The character and location of a site can influence parking demand. In urbanized and higher density transit-oriented areas, options that allow less reliance on a personal vehicle are available. It can even be possible to be car-free. This lowers the need for dedicated parking areas. Also, there are development areas known as mixed use that contain residences, places of work, shopping, and entertainment options. These types of combined uses can reduce the need for vehicle ownership for people who live or work there. Because the mixed use area has these closely located options, residents or employees can walk or bike. As one potential result, residents in these areas may decide to own only one vehicle instead of two, which reduces overall parking demand. Because parking is a resource, it can be operated to enhance its value. An example of this is shared parking. Rather than building the minimum required parking for an apartment building, an office building, and a retail center located on the same site, the demand for each of those uses can be studied, and a smaller parking area can be built that provides enough parking for all these uses based on hourly demand. Looking now toward the future, parking demand is changing with technology and people's behavior. Everyone's familiar with online ordering and home delivery of pretty much anything. This reduces parking demand when you don't have to go out to shop or eat. Also, even before COVID, remote working was growing annually. As we transition away from COVID, remote working is expected to continue to occur. These trends and other technologies to come will continue to influence the need for parking. Parking areas should be considered a resource to the entire community. It's land area that we have made a choice to use as parking. It could have been used for something else. When we consider the development of land, there are many elements that can be weighed, such as the environment, site design, and affordability. These are balanced with the need to provide parking, and sometimes the parking itself creates a need to address its effects, like stormwater runoff. Many times, the parking requirements for a site control how a site can be used. Questions we're asking with this project are the extent of parking's role in land use. How much parking do we really need? What are the trade-offs for less or more parking on a site? Where can we balance parking supply with other site use possibilities that will provide a community benefit? We want people to begin to think about priorities related to parking. Should a large amount of convenient parking be the ideal? Or can we think about balancing car parking against other desirable features like a quality urban streetscape that is inviting to safely walk and bike, or more open green space to enjoy cooling shade? Perhaps this gray slate could be redeveloped to trade a low-performing asset into a project that will generate added tax revenue to the county that can be applied to achieving our values. Every change has a consequence. If we are to look at a current problem with parking supply, how could we address it? Adding more parking is a solution, but what effects might that have? In any land use option, parking becomes part of a cost-benefit decision. What are the ideals we should be considering when making these decisions? Looking at the photo in this slide, if we wanted to add more parking to address the high demand depicted here, do we want to remove those trees in the background to add it? Or would having those trees be important enough to tolerate this amount of parking demand for a few hours a day? These are among the questions we would like you to think about as you listen to and view our presentation tonight. Community engagement is a critical element of this project. We're seeking meaningful feedback from all elements of the community who have personal experiences and thoughts about parking. But the community also includes business owners and tenants, land developers, nonprofit organizations, and religious assembly groups. Our engagement on this project will include those folks as well. We'll also use our technological resources, which enhances our reach to the community. Electronic meetings such as this will continue to be held, which increases participation opportunities. Our project website is also a great resource for project info. This project will focus on off-street parking and loading. We have 3 basic goals for the project. Adding best practices and new ideas for parking now and in the future. This includes looking more at the context of a site or area to determine its parking needs. Increasing clarity and flexibility in the administrative language of the ordinance. And streamlining parking review and approval, which includes increasing predictability of review processes, times, and outcomes. The parking requirements in the zoning ordinance haven't changed a lot since 1988. When considering that, think for a moment how much has changed from a world where the internet and smartphones were not available for entertainment and business. We've teamed up with our consultants, Clarion Associates and Nelson Nygaard, 2 firms that have extensive background in this effort to help us with this project. Together, we will pursue these primary activities: community engagement and feedback, examination and evaluation of best practices for parking, which includes getting information from regional and national municipalities on their programs and administration of parking to see how they can apply here, evaluation of our own requirements to see where adjustments can be proposed and best practices applied, and ultimately proposals for modification to the zoning ordinance will be developed for community, planning commission, and board consideration. The consultants will provide valuable information on the operation and dynamics of parking from a national and regional perspective that can have applications here in the county. They will analyze and identify current and future trends that will guide our recommendations. They'll also identify strategic approaches to consider when thinking about the provision of parking, looking at flexibility and context to help determine rates and requirements. We've completed our initial stage of the project, and we're now moving to development of a framework for next steps. We met with the Planning Commission about a month ago to begin to describe that framework, including an approach that would align parking with development areas of the county, from low density development to high density development, and tailor those parking requirements to those types of areas. In our lower density areas of the county, the current discussion is to not have very much change to the parking requirements. It's more looking at making some adjustments to the language associated with developing a parking rate and parking supply. And then it kind of progresses through tiers 2 and 3, where we're looking at higher density and intensity development areas in the county to see where lower parking requirements may fit relative to transit availability, development density, and other factors that would be occurring in those areas. And as part of that, we're going to continue to gather community feedback as we proceed. And when a proposal is developed, we'll return to seek feedback on this. We conducted community town halls in December and January, and more specific discussions with county committees and other focus groups are continuing to gain background and perspectives on parking here in the county. And I also want to note that we are speaking to the board's land use planning committee on March 15th, where we'll do a more detailed presentation of our proposed tiered framework, including discussion of some more technical information, as well as a discussion with the board about minimum requirements for bicycle parking. We want to have them respond with an endorsement of continuing to work on that element of the parking project. We're also going to talk to the board about electric vehicle parking and to see if we should be moving from allowing electric vehicle parking as part of the minimum parking requirements that we had just recently made modifications to within the last year or two, to thinking about whether or not we would want a minimum parking requirement for EV spaces within development. So we want to get the board's feedback on that as well, whether they wanted us to continue to look at that or whether we wanted to kind of proceed with this market-driven approach that we have today. So that's the latest on where we are with the project. And if you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Very clear presentation. So I get the impression you're kind of in the middle. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be accurate. We are. We did the initial outreach with town halls, and we had some other meetings, and we've started to meet with the board appointed committees. And we've also gotten a proposal from our consultant, and we're continuing to evaluate that as part of the project. And so in that recent time frame, as I mentioned, we've gone to the Planning Commission and kind of begun to outline that framework, and we'll do a little bit more of that in the board presentation on the 15th. But there's still a lot that we need to look at as far as the project details are concerned. So probably in sometime between May and July at this point, we're looking at having a proposal out for public discussion.
So in an effort to try to focus the discussion, is there any issue that you've come across that has to do with trails, sidewalks, or bikeways that you would like us to focus on? Any question, issue, controversy, choice that has to be made, change of anything of any sort?
Well, we don't. I don't know that we've had any controversial things that we've talked about, but walkability has come up a lot in the conversations that we've had with the community. Not only walkability within developed areas, but walkability between areas in the county. And while our project is not specifically addressing that, walkability is a critical component as far as what you would consider as far as a parking requirement. So that has been identified as a key issue by in our conversations with the public. And as I mentioned, we are looking at establishing, hopefully establishing a minimum requirement for bicycle parking. The question also would be whether or not we would include any sort of design elements in the ordinance. The ordinance typically it's kind of black and white for the most part as to what would be, it's a regulatory document. And then we also have a public facilities manual that lays out the design elements for development that occurs in the county. So it could be a blend of information in the ordinance and information added to the public facilities manual to kind of make that complete. And I do know that currently there is a reference in the public facilities manual to the FCDOT bike guidelines. So that's a helpful kind of interim situation that we have for that.
Yeah, this is Jim Klein from Mount Vernon.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question about incentives for providing bike parking and also proximity to a trail and other things that might apply to some of these lower density areas. If you have a business that's out in a low density area and you're near a trail and you don't provide bike parking, it doesn't really help much. But if you do, it makes it easier. And I'll give an example. We just moved into a space in Old Town Alexandria Not too long ago, I have no bike parking. I can't get the landlord to put in a little lift, which would be great, but so I'm not alone in that request. I think more people would bike if it was made easier, and businesses and developers should be given incentives to make that happen. I wonder if that's been addressed or raised as part of your issues development so far.
Austin, do you want to talk about the entitlement process and how we secure bike commitments there, and then I can tag on?
Yeah, so currently commitments for bike parking, same thing for EVC, electric vehicle charging, parking requirements are obtained during the entitlement process. So if I were to come in and I wanted to rezone a property, through the proper through proper conditions and proper negotiation, staff would suggest, if the developer is not suggesting bike parking, a certain percentage of spaces for let it be bike parking, short-term and long-term parking, based on the size of the development, intensity of development, or the density of the development. Currently, what staff is doing in Zoning Evaluations Division is looking at the FCDOT's existing bicycle parking guidelines, and then basing that, using those guidelines, basing those to make recommendations of what we would like to see. What our goal is that through this project is to memorialize bicycle parking requirements in the ordinance, unless we were to go to the board and the board were to say, no, we think you need to do something else. But at this point, that is our goal, to actually have a hard and fast actual requirement in the ordinance for new development. But when it comes to incentivizing, through the proper system, there is some incentivizing in the sense that, we may let you do X, Y, and Z, let it be, if there's a lot of times, if there's something that may be controversial, we may be more willing to lean on that controversial issue if you provide parking, if you provide other types of things that we ask for. So it is kind of a pretty hairy negotiation sometimes, but that's currently how it's done.
Yeah, and that's to Austin's point about trying to get a more structured framework for minimum requirements. It would take out at least the baseline negotiation that we currently have as part of the land use process. And currently, by right development, there is no bicycle requirement associated with by right. So if we were able to get these in place, that would open up some new avenues to be able to get some commitments toward bike infrastructure within specific sites. Conceivably, if there's a change of use or something like that, that would be a mechanism. Or if there is some other action taken as part of a by right development, that might give us some opportunities there. So we're hoping to be able to expand that capability as we move through this this process, and hopefully have something for the board to consider.
Hi, this is Sean Newman. I'm the representative from Fairfax Alliance for Better Bicycling, and I would highly encourage and really push to have a minimum amount of bike parking when you plan projects. Right now, in all of the locations, especially near me in the suburbs, I'm in Springfield, where I bike to, there is no bike parking anywhere. And so it's either lock it to, a trash can or a, like the handicap sign, which is really not appropriate. Or what I normally do is I just bring it in because there's literally no parking anywhere I go, including your trails, with good and improving connections. And it's really disappointing to not have any bike parking available at all. So that's the first thing that I'm going to say. The second thing is that we really need to make sure that we are considering that the interaction between bike parking, as you mentioned, and I really appreciate you mentioning this, is that regular, vehicle parking does take up space and resources of land use, and that land use, if it's not being used for vehicle parking, could be used for other purposes, including housing, including trails, including walkability improvement. So I'm glad that you included that in your presentation, and I really hope that it makes it into the final project and is highly considered, that free and widespread parking has costs and has detriment to other aspects of society.
Thank you so much, Sean. Yeah, and that's something, working with FCDOT right now, looking at, the importance of adding this to our ordinance for exactly what you're talking about. I grew up in a part of the county that was very suburban, and it was rare to see bicycle parking anywhere. And so what we're trying to do is to promote that even in these suburban communities, because majority of our county isn't Tyson's, and Tyson's is great, but we have a very vast county with very varied land uses and intensity. One thing I would like to mention before we go forward is that FCDOT is currently updating their bicycle parking guidelines. And so what we're doing is we're trying to work with FCDOT to make sure that we are going to be implementing the most up-to-date kind of recommendations that FCDOT currently has on those bike parking guidelines, which may include micromobility as well, which is things like scooters. We're going to still in conversations about that, and that's pretty early on, but just wanted to put that out there.
Lydia?
Yes, hi Mike and Austin. Thanks for your presentation. And I was wondering if you could speak more to the anticipated barriers for this. I specifically think of our Fairfax County Public Schools, which are still developing, especially in our more suburban area, with massive amounts of parking without taking into consideration bike parking or encouraging more active transport options. Or even all the development that is going on in Sully District because they have more land, yet we know that Fairfax County is not getting more land, which is why, fortunately you have gotten this project. But I wonder if you could speak more to these barriers, especially related to FCPS, which gets 52% of our county's budget.
Well, conceivably, if we have a minimum requirement for bicycle parking, then all uses would be subjected to that. So, if the schools came in to modify their site in some way, they would fall into needing to provide a minimum amount of bicycle parking. I know also that FCDOT has over the years been trying to work with schools to increase that mode of transportation. I know that in the past, I'm not sure if it's still an active program, but there was Safe Route to Schools to try to get infrastructure constructed to be able to have neighborhood students ride their bikes to school and have a safe way of doing that. And inherent with that process would be, or that those projects would be providing more bicycle facilities on the campus. So, I don't have a lot of details to speak to, what the current status is, and maybe Nicole has some information to fill in there. But as far as the parking requirement would be concerned, if that was adopted, it would apply to schools as well.
Yeah, just to clarify, schools are currently subject to this review. So the schools that are expanding, for example, usually come in for a review on bike parking. And then we work through the process with them. What is good to know about schools is that they can actually order bike racks as needed as part of their office supplies. So what I've heard from them is that they have a certain desire to provide bike parking for the current amount of students that are biking to school. So they usually do a tally and provide some extra parking with the understanding that space needs to be provided for future expansions. And that can actually quite easily be done through the principal. But ideally, we would have a more formal process of actually requiring a minimum standard for schools. So there's definitely room for improvements. But if you're aware of any schools that do need bike parking, they do have the opportunity, and many don't actually know that the principal can order bike racks and through their pretty much office material catalog.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up regarding the barriers. I know some schools that are in denser areas do actually charge a fee, especially for student parking. Yes. So in terms of shrinking the parking, do you anticipate that being a challenge?
Well, it's an interesting question. And we've been actively talking about it as part of the project, as well as our own processes internally. We've had a number of high schools over the past few years undertake some remodeling projects, and they've asked our agency, Land Development Services, to provide a determination on the parking for the site. And most of the school, the way the minimum requirement for parking for secondary schools is 0.3 spaces per student. And that's based on the expected maximum enrollment. So a lot of the schools, particularly in the toward the Beltway in Fairfax County, were built at a time when the student population was much lower, and the parking requirement may have been lower as well. And so there is, on paper, there is a shortage of parking. However, the school board does, as you indicate, regulate parking, student parking. What they typically do is they assess their needs for staff parking and visitor parking, and then whatever spaces are left over, they lease to students for the school year who are students who are driving. And it's first come, first serve. And then once those are exhausted, then students have to find an alternative way to get to school. There are also, most of these high schools also have permit parking districts, so that kind of regulates the spillover effect that would naturally occur otherwise. So they have a system now that manages student parking and manages overall parking for the site fairly effectively. But they're no way close to meeting the county's minimum requirement. And so that is one of the things that we need to talk about for this project is, do we reset the requirement in some way for secondary schools?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michael, I have a question. You had talked about maybe talking about the number of bicycle parking spaces. I would encourage the group to look at maybe the quality of the space, maybe in directional signs. It doesn't do any good to have X number of spaces if no one knows where they're at, from the street. So a nice directional sign might be helpful. And also maybe if security, if someone's going to park their bike long term, more than a couple hours, they drive to work, they would expect maybe have a nice safe place to lock it up, as opposed to just a short term where you're just going to stop in and get a cup of coffee. That's one thing. But if it's an all-day parking, it would be hopefully secured.
Yeah, as I recall, and I haven't looked recently, but I think the draft minimum requirements we had kind of incorporated that element as well, particularly the security element, basically short-term and long-term parking. And the long-term parking would or should inherently have the security measures and that sort of thing that you're speaking of. But that again is one of those, does it go into the zoning ordinance or does it go into the PFM? And so that's a discussion that we'll have to continue to have as we go forward.
So one question I had is there any analysis that, say, Active Fairfax is doing that can help you inform for bike parking for in any demand or needs areas or that sort of thing? Is there any sort of cross-pollination analysis that one project can help you with to help answer some questions in another project?
That is possible. We are meeting with FCDOT later this month, and that is probably going to be one of the items on the agenda, is to see how those programs can relate. Because as I mentioned earlier, walkability was identified by a number of community members as being a concern. And so if there's a way for the parking project to somehow encourage more walkable areas, that is a goal of the project. We are definitely interested in, as part of this conversation of right sizing parking, there are other benefits that can be realized as part of that, including, how you design a site to create a more walkable community. Do you how you locate the parking areas so that you're creating buildings that are on the street rather than having parking in front of them, that sort of thing. And, minimizing the walk path from the parking area to the door. There are a number of different factors like that, some of which would occur on private property, but nevertheless, we definitely want to encourage, where we can, that relationship.
And to add to that, so the updated guidelines will take land use into account. It currently does as well. The current guidelines differentiate between urban and TSA areas and all other areas, which may be still a little bit too broad. But the new guidelines will be actually based on the upcoming AASHTO bike design guidelines, which do include a bike parking section. So we will need to make sure that we use that as a baseline, but if there's any customization that's needed based on our land use scenario, we have that flexibility to do so. So that's something we will work through the next couple of weeks, but that's a really good question.
Yeah, it's one of those things, I speak of it often, of this iterative process that we go through with land use and transportation and other planning elements. It's like squeezing a balloon. Like we squeeze this part of the balloon and we address these issues, and then that means another part of the balloon needs to be addressed. And so it's kind of this climbing the ladder sort of thing to get to where we want to be. And then, of course, by the time we get there, there are more goals and values that we want to address. But that certainly we want to be informed by Active Fairfax and the principles of Active Fairfax in ensuring that, the parking supply that we're providing isn't going to present conflicts to that.
This is Sean Newman again from FAB.
Sure.
Yeah, so I thinking about the minimum trail guidance that we have, right? That we recently reviewed this within the last 6 months or so, where they made some updates to the minimum trail guidance for various locations. I would absolutely like to see something similar for various situations. I think that's in the public facilities manual for bicycle parking, as far as, what kind of minimal facility would be required or recommended or, waiverable to on the lower end. But something that would really provide a better facility than the either non-existent or, kind of flimsy options that you frequently see now.
Even let me take that one. So the current bicycle design guidance is very detailed on what is expected of a bike rack. It's a little bit outdated and it's a bit too much information. So once you have too much information, application of the essential items is not as given. So to make it a little bit more user-friendly, the guidelines will also be streamlined. So it won't be 18 pages anymore, but hopefully very succinct visual presentation of what good bike racks look like, of course, with design flexibility, but there are certain minimum standards that should be met. And in the rezoning process, we are pretty successful in negotiating those. This is going to be a new world for us to work with the by right. And just completely base it on a guideline. So ideally that interaction with FCDOT to review the proposed bike parking facilities by right development would be great, if that's something we can achieve, because I can tell you that about 95% of all the applications I see are incorrect. There's something that isn't implemented right, designed right, so there's always a lot of hand-holding involved. I always say bike parking is rocket science for some reason. So while the industry is not quite there yet, and this is not quite mainstream or normalized, and there's a pretty low capacity on the development side on how to design adequate bike facilities, I think the county really needs to heavily be involved in that. And the better the guidelines we can provide, the better the outcome. But we need to be very, very specific, and if needed, individual review and negotiations and directly with the architect is definitely helpful to have.
Lydia, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand again.
Ah, okay, sorry about that. So let me, something that occurred to me as we're talking about this, the vast majority of commercial facilities that we deal with on a daily basis have already been permitted, they're in existence, they're mostly grandfathered, and for the most part, that isn't going to change with any of this. Is that correct?
I don't know. So the answer to that question is kind of tough, and then maybe a two-part project in a sense. It's something that we definitely, it's an issue we're currently addressing. And so a lot of what we've talked about is for new development. But at what point do these types of guidelines kick in for redevelopment? And so if it's something where, you know, hey, you're adding a tenant space, you know, in a really large shopping mall, maybe not. But if you are redeveloping a large portion of a site or majority of a site, it's possible these would kick in. And those are still things that are very early on in conversation. But again, a lot of our conversation right now has been for new development. But I do foresee that there very well could be some sort of a threshold for requiring these types of, let's use bike parking for the example, requiring that for redevelopment of sites over a certain percentage. Mike, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. You know, I think it's desirable to have by right become involved, because I think it's just missed out. You know, there are missed opportunities there to really strengthen our bike network and our infrastructure. But the devil's in the details kind of thing of, you know, at what point do you trigger a need to address that circumstance? You know, Austin kind of hit it on the head a little bit. If you're redeveloping your site, but you're still by right, then maybe that's the trigger point. You know, I think it would have to be something a little bit more substantial as far as a site change to have that qualification come into the discussion. But that, as Austin said, that's something that we're going to have to flesh out as we move through this project.
I imagine, and real quick before we address the next question, I imagine that it would fall kind of into the nonconformity standards of our ordinance currently, which says that, you know, if you have a nonconforming use, that nonconforming use can, you know, pretty much exist without having to change, but certain changes to a nonconformity may require that use to then come to current code. So when I have a garage that's too close to a property line and that garage gets, you know, I decide I'm going to take that garage down, I just can't rebuild it in the same location. I have to come up to current code. So that's a very simplistic example of it, but I do think that it would kind of fall into that nonconformity and really the legal aspect too, from the county attorney's opinion on when we could actually require that type of you know, requirements for adding bicycle parking, other types of things for changes in nonconformities.
Hey, this is Sean from Fab again. Will these updated guidelines, will this make it easier? So like, for example, if there's a shopping center that currently has, under the new guidelines, excess parking, would these guidelines make it easier for them to turn that excess parking into another use?
Potentially. Go ahead, Austin.
Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
I would say that, yeah, potentially. So one of the things that we've heard a lot recently has been about, you know, wanting to see a direct trade-off from surface parking area to green space per se. Our ordinance, or our amendment currently is not proposing that trade-off, but it's something that we are very aware of and is actually a priority item on our zoning ordinance work program that will be addressed by a subsequent amendment for landscaping and screening in parking lots. So with that, they're currently, with the allowing of redevelopment by lowering parking, you know, requirements, it's up to the landowner of what they redevelop it as. Currently, again, we are looking in the future through another amendment for possibly requiring more landscaping and screening, things like that, for a trade-off at that point.
And just to add to Austin's comment, the recent example that we've used in our presentations and we'll be using in the board's presentation is the Fair Oaks Mall site. And what has happened with the Fair Oaks Mall site is we looked at regional mall parking. This was kind of the first foray into what has become this project. We had a consultant, the same consultant that's on our team now, Nelson Nygaard, looking at mall parking and seeing where we could right size that rate for regional malls, and therefore in the county, Fair Oaks Mall being one of them. And as a result of that, the minimum requirement was modified to allow a lesser parking supply to be built. And if anyone, those of you who have been to Fair Oaks Mall, you've probably noticed there's a lot of parking area that's really underutilized even during the holiday season. So that was one of the catalysts that caused us to look at that parking rate. And then as a result of that, after that lower rate was approved by the board, then the mall filed a plan amendment that would allow redevelopment of that parking area. So that plan amendment went through a review and was approved by the board in 2020. So then the next step would be a rezoning entitlement request to allow that development to be built. And in that entitlement process, there's a lot of negotiation about what's going to be provided on the site, what amenities are provided, what green is provided, how the buildings are going to be laid out, and that sort of thing. But it's one of those situations that takes a mall and a surrounding parking area and provides an opportunity to create a place with that site rather than just a retail center. So that would be a pretty recent example of how we've made adjustments to parking and then hopefully reap a benefit from that adjustment.
Jim, did you want to say something?
Yes. So on the complexities of everything you've just said, just completely overwhelmed me. So I'll take your word for it. But on another more proactive note, the Route 1 corridor with the embark process and all that is going to have some great bike and walking facilities, good activity centers and all this. And it won't do anybody a bit of good if they can't find a place to park in these new businesses that are coming for sure. So I wonder how you can get ahead of all this through that process and using the visioning that's taken place, the comprehensive plan amendment, and now the redevelopment that will take place. Is there some way to get through all this, what do you call it, entitlements to establish better bike and ped facilities as part of this, including and especially parking and access to businesses via the bicycle? I just don't see it happening because, when you're negotiating bicycles, our 1% of our commuter use of bicycles is not going to compete with all the other demands that you have to work with. So I'm just trying to figure out a way to get ahead of all this.
Well, I won't speak completely from the standpoint of an expert since I'm not in the zoning realm, but I do have familiarity with the zoning process, and there are recommendations, there are plan recommendations, as you know, for bike and ped in the embark corridor. And so, but it's an iterative process to get there in the sense that we have individual development applications and, we're negotiating with those developers to get, as part of those negotiations, it's bike infrastructure, as well as designing the streetscape to accommodate bicycle as part of the embark recommendations. So I think the latest example that we have is Alexandria Crossing, where that was part of the conversation. They designed their streetscape to be able to accommodate the bike facility, the parallel bike facility along Route 1, and they've made commitments to provide bike infrastructure within the buildings and so forth, and as well as bike parking visitor bike parking and that sort of thing. But, there could be some projects, VDOT projects, the BRT project that may, on a grander scale, be able to provide that infrastructure as part of that project. But it's usually, a lot of times it's up to, getting an individual development application and getting those commitments through that review process.
Okay, thanks. I'm grateful that you've come and made these presentations. Very good information. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
One more question. I'm sorry. Is this process going to end up with an easier path to approving businesses, especially based on parking? I know there's been a couple of pretty high-profile cases recently in McLean and Annandale where businesses, had two or three too few parking spaces for what was required by the county, and it was causing massive issues. And is there going to be more flexibility with this process?
Yeah, so that's something that streamlining our administrative reviews and some of our exceptions in certain cases is something we're looking at, and that's actually one of our project goals. The example that you used is a really good example, and that's from the occupancy permit standpoint. So you get all the way through as a business owner, you figure everything out, you get your permits pulled, and you get to the last moment to find out that we have two less parking spaces that we need before we can get our occupancy permit and open our doors. So what we're looking at is kind of standardizing rates in some ways. So first off, rates are more understandable, getting away from things like basing rates on number of employees, but basing rates on gross floor area, which is a known commodity throughout a process of how kind of large a tenant space or a business is going to be. And then further looking into a kind of bucketing of rates, we'll call it. So like instead of two like uses having separate rates, possibly combining those rates to have one similar rate or the same rate. And in cases with mixed use buildings, let it be an office park, having just an overall rate for the development as a whole. And then lastly, what I would say is that we've also looked into the ability of having some sort of a leeway to allow for, let's just use, say there's 100 spaces, required, but you come in at 95 spaces, have the ability, or maybe not 100 spaces, 50 spaces required, whatever it is, but you come in at 45, that we have the ability to administratively sign off on that as being fine, instead of having to go through a whole parking reduction process, go to the board, go through Mike's group to figure out, how is there a way to reduce parking? But I'll let Mike touch on that anymore if he wants to.
No, I think you covered it pretty well, Austin. It's just, I think overall we're trying to recognize particularly in these community business centers and CRDs, that the site design, the site layouts, the sizes of the site and that sort of thing are constrained. They're older subdivisions and there aren't a lot of site consolidation opportunities unless you want to come through the entitlement process. And so, that's one of the things we're trying to address as part of the project, is to create more opportunities to make the parking work.
Yeah, and I'll add on to what Mike said there too, is that, an area that we're looking at, especially is like industrial districts. As we know, if you've gone to an industrial park recently, you see a lot of different types of uses in industrial parks that maybe you didn't see previously. You see a lot of places of worship, these different, types of businesses or uses that have different times of demand. And we're requiring that you park both uses, even though I have a use that's only active on the weekend or a use that's an active after hours use. We're looking towards not requiring you to park those uses separately, but allow for a shared parking, because just because I have a business that's open 8 to 4, that's not going to impact the parking for a business that's open from, in the evening, a business that's mainly open on the weekend, and looking at the uses on site and how they function as a whole, compared to just checking a box to say you have to give us X parking regardless of how your business runs.
Does anybody have any further questions?
This is Mark. I just wanted to mention that a lot of our older sidewalks are so narrow and could use retrofitting or just wider sidewalks would encourage more walking and more pedestrian activity. With a buffer from the road, that would be helpful. So Austin, you mentioned something about when does development or redevelopment trigger, rezoning, and maybe there should be some middle ground where you don't have to go all the way to the new regulations, but something, that's more appropriate, more easy to manage for a smaller renovation. I guess I'm thinking of more residential areas where the sidewalks are so small, but of course you wouldn't, want to make people widen their neighborhood sidewalks unless it was more of a main thoroughfare. And then one other aspect I was thinking of was parking lots also can be a blockage for pedestrians. You don't really want to walk through a parking lot. So there should be requirements, and there probably are, I don't know, for sidewalks around or getting through parking lots.
Yeah, that comes to the comments we've heard about placemaking. That just because we're changing parking requirements, when you still have all your parking in front of a building and you have people that are using multimodal transportation, let it be I'm taking a bus, let it be that I'm walking to a property, I'm a lot less likely to do that if when I come to the property and I have to walk 400 yards across a parking lot in the pouring down rain, I'd probably just drive my car instead. But we're definitely looking at placemaking and how we can, incentivize placemaking in a sense. And then further to your comment about, kind of a middle ground, we currently have that type of to an extent, we have that type of a middle ground approach in certain commercial revitalization districts in cases where you have a nonconformity. An example that comes to mind, for instance, and this is, kind of maybe not an example that would be applicable to new development, but so say if you had a sign or something that's too large, say you had the structure that's too large. In a commercial revitalization district, we currently say that as long as you reduce that structure sign by, reduce it in size or area of some way, then you can keep it. But it's kind of that getting down closer to compliance. But we definitely note your comment about, at what point does that get triggered, and it's something that we're definitely going to be looking at and trying to figure out where that threshold is, and if it is an interim type of a fix instead of a full compliance to the current code.
Thank you. Yes, it's better if something gets fixed, one way or another than not done at all.
Any more comments, folks? So I want to thank our guest speakers and like to know how this thing is going, or if anything emerges, key issues with regards to pedestrians or cyclists, or connections with trails. Obviously, we'd be happy to entertain any reconnection, but I suspect you have a rather comprehensive process, so you're not going to all of a sudden discover something 3 months from now that you haven't that you'd have to put before us. But do you have any further questions for us?
No, but what I did want to respond to your comment about coming back to see you. I'm pretty sure that we're going to want to come back and brief you on, whenever we have a proposal. We hope the proposal will include bicycle minimum requirements. And so, I think that you'll be on the list of organizations that we will come back to talk about our proposal whenever it's ready for public consumption. So, so stay tuned for that. But I wanted to say that we appreciate the opportunity to have tonight's conversation. It was a very good conversation to get that perspective. on biking, a lot of information about biking and bike infrastructure, which I think is important for us to consider as we move through this project.
Yeah, I would echo what Mike said, and definitely we're appreciative of all your comments and knowledge on these topics. And I would also suggest in the chat earlier on in the meeting, I dropped our Parking Reimagined webpage link. I would just stay in touch with that webpage. We're constantly adding new content to that page of let it be upcoming meetings, ways to interact. And as we go further on down the line, you know, aside from just coming back to groups like your group, we're going to be doing things like surveys on certain types of issues. And I would also suggest that on that page, you're going to see links to previous meetings and forthcoming meetings. If this is something that interests you, I would highly suggest that next Tuesday at 9:30, you watch the Board of Supervisors meeting. There's a link on that page to see kind of what the comments from the board are. We do have a slide that I'll be presenting on bike parking as a proposal. And so I expect that there should be some good conversation on bike parking along with other things like the tiered approach and electric vehicle charging.
And that's 9:30 a.m. So you can have breakfast with the board, a bagel and coffee while you're listening to the board, listening to us present, and then see what the board reacts to.
And that'll be live streamed online on the Channel 16 webpage or on cable Channel 16.
What's the table? What's the time? What's the date?
9:30, and it is March 15th.
March 15th. Ides of March.
Yes, that has already crossed my mind, which is not a good, not a good thing.
Only if you seek to be an emperor.
Right. Well, I could be the emperor of park. I could be the park king, emperor of parking. So, or I could be dethroned.
Okay, we have a rule that anytime somebody does a bad pun, it means they're done.
Excellent. I should have done that an hour ago.
Exactly.
Well, thanks once again, and everyone have a good evening.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
See you. All right, so our agenda has us move to the other topics. And the first of the other topics, Sean, is the Safe Routes to School program follow-up on the draft letter to the Board of Supervisors regarding funding for the Safe Routes to School program coordinator. The floor is yours.
Hey, good evening, everybody. So I am working on pulling that up on my end here right now. So I sent out the Safe Routes to School letter, and also I noticed we have Safe Routes to School twice on the agenda, which is fine, I guess. But so I sent out the Safe Routes to School letter, and I guess, does anybody have any feedback? I'd like to bring that up for a vote to send to the Board of Supervisors and to the school board.
Did you send it to the whole committee?
It was sent out with the agenda and the
okay.
And the minutes. And so for those who were not here last time, I can give just a kind of a brief recap. Having trouble getting my computer to pull anything up right now, which is unfortunate. But basically, I apologize. Give me just a moment.
It's okay. It happens to me too, Sean.
Is it possible to put the letter on the screen?
Yeah, that would be a great idea.
Give me a second.
So while you're working on that, I'll just give a brief recap of what the issues are. So the Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure program is a grant-funded program through the Fairfax County Public Schools. And it's been running for the last, I believe, 7 years and has had great success in a couple of areas. So one of the big things that they do is they provide bicycles and bicycle education training to a variety of schools, so that schools can teach children to ride bikes safely, and and to improve their ability to get around safely by bicycle, which has been a very important advance. One of the other big things that they've done is bike and walk to school day events, promoting that, helping provide additional materials for teachers or principals to hand out, and to kind of help incentivize that. Also being a great resource for both administrators and parents to help understand better ways to get to school, and just provide general encouragement, general advice, general education in those areas. So they've been working for several years now. It has been a great program run by Sally Smallwood. She's come and briefed this committee several times, I believe. And unfortunately, it is in danger of coming to an end. There has been a move recently at some of the more recent budget meetings from the school board to bring this funding back in. And the purpose of this letter is to, from this committee, which is all about biking, walking, etc., to have this committee send a letter in support of those changes, or excuse me, in support of continued funding in the 22 to 23 school year, and to help just provide one more piece of the pie, or excuse me, one more bit of impetus for the school board and the Board of Supervisors to provide this funding.
So right now, the school board funds the Safe Routes to School, correct?
So right now, it is a federal grant funded program that comes through VDOT to the schools. It's kind of complicated, but bottom line is that grant is going away at the state and federal level, at least in that way.
I see. And so what are we asking the Board of Supervisors to do?
Well, we're asking the Board of Supervisors and the school board to fund one full-time FTE position to continue the Safe Routes to School program.
Okay, but that would be the school board that does this, not the Board of Supervisors. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that was one of the conversations we had at the last meeting, which was a question of where can we send our committee letter to, and if I recall correctly, the end result that we kind of settled on was that in support of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, we can send it to both the County Board of Supervisors and the school board to show our support.
Okay. So, right.
So I guess my question is, are there any objections to this letter, or are there any modifications that we would like to make to this letter?
Hi, maybe I'm just new kid on the block syndrome because it's my first meeting, but I would almost want to make the asks more specific, or at least alternatives more specific. I see as the Board of Supervisors reviews the fiscal year 2022 budget, Are you referring to the budget cycle that is occurring now for fiscal year 2023? Or are you referring to the approval for the 2022 budget and maybe you're asking about carryover funds or something like that to fund this position? And I do agree that we need to be, I understand where the place for the Board of Supervisors and the school board would come into play, but it seems like funding like this would come from the school board, who justifiably so had $100 million at least proposed in fiscal year 2023 added to its budget. And if we're looking for carryover funds, should probably be the ones to push with this letter supporting them for funding for this position.
So I'll address those backwards if you don't mind. So your second question, I agree that it would be the primary group that we need to influence in this case is the school board. The result that we came to at the end of our last meeting, as I said, was that, you know, we can send it, we directly support the Board of Supervisors. And so we should send this to the Board of Supervisors because that's who we support, but that we can also basically CC the school board. As far as your first question,
that gets us past the legal requirement that we only interact with the Board of Supervisors. So, but we have to ask somebody to do something, and I think Lydia and I are saying what specifically are we asking? Who are we asking to do? So, do what?
That is a great question, and if we can make this more specific, I am all in favor of that.
So I think, as I'm sure many of us are advocating in our own ways for at the different budget cycles, Joe Mondora, who used to be the CFO of all of Fairfax County, gave some interesting insight. He said the budget cycle is a dogfight amongst all the different departments, but everyone ignores quarterly funds or carryover funds. And those can be possible places, you know, if we're looking at one FTE position that we can fund for a year, that's thousands of dollars, I'm thinking, versus millions of dollars. I don't know how much the grant was giving to this program, but that might be a more specific ask that is very, very realistic that we could push the board into supporting.
Absolutely, and I believe that as it stands right now, that and I had written this letter before we had a final result, but that the school board did not include a request for this position in their budget request to the Board of Supervisors, and so having the Board of Supervisors take some of the money from carryover funds and applying that to this position would be a very, I think, I agree, reasonable method of doing this.
Go ahead, Howard.
I would suggest that we ask the Board of Supervisors to include it in the 2023 budget, the one that's just being voted on and discussed now. If they decline to act on it now and put it off to the first quarter carryover funds, that's their option. But I think there's an urgent need to get that position filled so we don't lose the momentum that we had gained in previous years. I followed the school board discussions, and they were negotiating many different items, and they, you know, it's trading back and forth, and they were going to work with the superintendent to present some new things. And we don't know what that's going to be, but I would think if this committee could write a specific letter with the ask for the one position, and related program funds, perhaps, whatever that is. That was
Well,
the
you know,
message across.
there's another strategy, and that is not to tell them how to do it. Simply say that the committee find a way to replace this critical position that affects county quality of life and even outside of the school itself allows us to capitalize on other investments we're doing in trails, sidewalks, and bikeways. In other words, it's a balance of investment question. You're investing in trail, sidewalks, and bikeways, but we're ending the safe routes to school, which is a key user of trail, sidewalks, and bikeways.
And that would accomplish the same thing, I think.
Yeah, and then then we're not telling them how to what budget to put it in or what to do that. We've clearly identified it's funded in the 2021-22 school year. It needs to be funded in the 22-23 school year, it's both schools and it's a both schools and county issue. So you guys are the masters of doing this. You work with staff and figure it out. But we're not telling you how to fund a position. We just realize that it's a critical thing. So
I think it's
based on that
urgent
input,
that we act on it tonight, though, and we get it through before the budget hearings, and it's very timely.
Yeah.
So I would say my request right this moment would be, I think the key paragraph in this document is that second paragraph. What can we change or what can we modify in there that, based on, I like what you just said, Ken. I think that's why we have it written the way it is that I don't think we should be prescriptive on them. And even if they want to put this position in FCDOT and have it be a liaison position, I think that's also fine. I don't want to tell them how to do it, but I think that we should tell them that it should be done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if there's any suggestions for how to modify, especially that second paragraph, anything else as well, but specifically, I think that second paragraph is the most important. I think we should take those into consideration right now.
So let me make a suggestion rather than to say to begin funding, to find an appropriate source to fund the non-infrastructure, fund the position. Really, we're asking to fund a position, right?
That's correct. It's basically it's a position.
So to fund the position to manage the SRTS non-infrastructure. So simply say yeah. So something like that. Keeping the wording that you've got there, but making it clear that we're not being prescriptive. You find the way to do it. You guys know all the nooks and crannies. Recognize this key priority, an important gap that affects. So
the TSB urges the board to find funding to continue the, no, that sounds too many fundings.
This is Jim. I think you're just trying to replace the lost position. It's not rocket science.
Right.
A lot of these federal and state funded programs end, and this one has ended, I guess. For the funding, at least in Fairfax, has ended, and Fairfax County has gotten a huge benefit out of this, maybe more than some of the more rural counties in the state. So we need to step up. That's all I'd say. Step up and do it. And I think the language that Ken was referring to about the investment in the generation of students that benefit from that is really important to their investments in the trails, sidewalks, and bikeways throughout the county that they're doing right now.
Sean, maybe you want to say something that the board exhaust any and all funding opportunities that in order to ensure the continuity of the position in the program?
I like that. Can you, so urges the board to exhaust
Any and all funding opportunities to ensure the continuity of the program and the position.
Yeah, that's good.
And I would ask with the clause in the beginning, as the Board of Supervisor reviews the fiscal year 2022 budget, if we're going to keep it, I might be mistaken, but it should be fiscal year 2023. But I almost wonder if that pigeonholes us into the board thinking about we're asking only for budget funding, and maybe we should say something more like, as the Board of Supervisors determines how to shift funding for this position from a grant program, we urge the Board of Supervisors to exhaust any and all funding, et cetera, so that we're not pigeonholing them into thinking we're only talking about the fiscal year budget.
Why don't we just drop that introduction anyway? It's obvious we're asking for it.
Well, we could drop it as well.
Just start with what Beth said. We urge that the board, TSB urges the board to find whatever it was.
So here's what I have now for that second paragraph. The TSB urges the Board of Supervisors to exhaust any and all funding opportunities to ensure the continuity of the SRTS non-infrastructure program and associated full-time position using county funds beginning in the FCPS 2022 to 2023 school year.
Perfect. I like that.
Okay, so that's the only changes that I just muted myself for some reason. That I am hearing so far. Is there any other changes that anybody else would like?
This is Jimmy. Excuse me. Jim again. The only thing I would do is take the 2 paragraphs according to Virginia's 2020 Safe Routes to School Success Book. I'd put that toward the bottom and move your key bullet points at the end toward the top, at the top. Now, the real reason that you're doing this. So, I mean, it's just a long read to go through those 2 paragraphs. It's not like you're quoting from something they may already have had or whatever. So just try to shorten the key asks and put them right up in front, and the why right up front, and be done with it.
That seems reasonable to me. Any objections to that? Hearing none. Okay.
So can we make a motion to, who's going to send this letter, I guess, before I make the motion? That you can?
I thought it was just be Ken, yeah.
It is me.
So I just want to make a motion that the letter be, the TSB committee request Sean to revise the letter as stated in the meeting and pass it along to Ken Comer for transmittal or something to that effect.
I second.
Any objections?
Ken, are you okay being the final editor of this thing?
If anybody volunteers, that would be much. The most difficult part of this is the email has to go to all the Board of Supervisors and all the school board, which means I need all their email addresses, plus everybody on the committee, plus staff. So it becomes a rather challenging, but I've already got much of that down in a group email on my webmail account. So that part's okay. I have the template, so it's a 2-page letter, so it makes it even more challenging, but that's okay. We can do it.
You small print.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to read it.
Okay, cool.
Thanks for that, Carl. I appreciate that.
Do you have the school board members' emails, or do you need some help pulling those together?
I do need some help with those, yes.
All right, I think I should be able to include that in my email to you all, or when I send you the updated document. I will include as many of those as I can find. Sure, hopefully all of them.
Great, Sean. I'll okay, I appreciate it. And Sean, I'm going to rely upon you to proofread it once I've got it in a format.
Have we formally closed the motion yet?
We have not closed the motion. I guess we're still discussing it. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, so let's close it out. Anybody opposed to this motion? Anybody wish to abstain from this motion? So I assume everybody else is in favor. So so the motion carries.
Thank you, everybody.
We have a number of vacant members. In formatting, I got to figure out what I do with vacant members. So that's I'm gonna have to dig into history. It's a shame we lost Wade Smith because he used to do this too. But anyway, we'll figure that out. Okay. On our agenda, Route 50 transportation study, including multi-use crossings of the Beltway. There's no name next to it. Lauren or Nicole, have you guys had anything? Did you even know about this?
Hey, Ken, that was put in by Howard Albers. We didn't put him down because it really seems like something the staff needs to tell us about. He asked the question and we would like to get an update on the pedestrian aspects of that study.
It was included in, I think it was the carryover funds from the last fiscal year. They said there was plenty of money to fund all the 3 or 4 studies that they were going to be doing. So now, if that being the case, my question is, when will FCDOT be studying it?
So with that elaboration, go ahead, Nicole.
Those are in the planning section. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out where the studies are housed because I don't know exactly.
This is an area that the Washington area bicyclists are interested in because this is a key impediment to the Arlington Boulevard Trail. This will not, the crossing of the Beltway is going to interrupt the long-term trail, and that's what I'm interested in.
So I have not seen a scope. So there were a few scopes that were run by the active transportation team that had active transportation aspects to it. I have not seen that one, so I'm not sure where they are. So we need to get back to you on that. So Chris would be the better person to talk to about that. And again, it's site planning doing the study. I know they're having 4 or 5 studies that they're just launching, but it's funded, and I'm sure they're working on developing it, and hopefully we'll hear soon.
Okay, so Nicole, could we ask you to ask Chris to give us an update? We'll put Chris's next name next to it for next month's meeting. Okay. See if we can get an update on. The key question, I think, is what's the status of the studies? They seem to have been funded. We were told they were funded. So, are they going to start? Are they still funded? Are they going to happen? Something like that. All right. Fairfax County, Prince William County Trail Coordination Report from Karen, and Karen is not here. Nicole, do you have any information on the 2 vacant committee seats?
So I was checking with Lauren too, and we do not, because we don't work on vacancies. So that's done by the committee, the Board of Supervisors, with board approval. So we would just, let you know if there's a new committee member, just like Lydia. We just, we are just informed of those, but we're not actively involved in finding
that's true of the one seat, which is Providence District. That's the obviously the supervisor's office's responsibility to find somebody, and I'm sure they're looking. But the Area Disability Services Board, I think staff had engaged with them to see if they could find a person to replace them or replace the person or stand in.
Yeah, we'll make a note for Chris and David to see if they have done that. They have not briefed us on the vacancies.
Okay, sounds good. The Deputy County Executive is a potential briefer. Actually, I got an email from her today, which I haven't had a chance to open and read. So I'll address that next month, I guess. VDOT briefing on Bikeped Trail connectivity to the planned new American Legion Bridge. Generally part of our staff reports. Usually we get a lot from Chris when he does this. Either one of you two know anything about changes or issues with regards to that?
We know about the issues of the connections, but I'm not aware of any changes recently. I know there's a lot of work that's being done by the advocacy, community on both sides of the bridge. On the Fairfax County side, there are some connectivity issues. I don't know, Beth may be able to talk about those as well. That affects the parks a little bit, but even though this is more of a National Park Service issue.
I actually haven't heard much about the update for the 495 Next project or the American Legion ones in terms of trails and connectivity. So as far as I know, not much has changed, but I haven't heard any updates recently.
Yeah. So that Bill Niederinghaus is very actively involved in on both sides of the bridge, appealing to higher level politicians to address some of those issues. So since both of it is a federal pushback on the connectivity.
Right.
And I believe he spoke of it last time, where it's early on the Maryland side, where it's a circuitous route on the Maryland side once you get over the American Legion Bridge. So.
Right. They're not going to drop to the trail, to the towpath, which would be the obvious thing to do.
Correct. Well, that's the whole reasoning why they don't want to do it, because they don't want increased pedestrian activity on the trail. It would be too popular. So by providing this alternative route, it seems like they're trying to limit access to the trail. Which is very problematic, obviously.
Is that a final decision then, or is it still up for negotiations?
I'll jump in on that. The last I talked to Bill, the thinking seems to be changing within the federal bureaucracy of the National Park Service. He's contacted U.S. senators and is holding meetings, and I don't think it's a federal answer, Howard. I think that the shift is coming, and it's just going to be a matter of keeping to beat the drums. But Bill is pretty good at beating drums, as you know. So I think, we can stand by for further news, but, trying to coordinate what the staff knows, what we know, and everybody, so that we get the same picture at the meetings. And maybe we ought to have Bill come back in a couple of months and tell us what he's up to.
I think that would be a good thing for next month. That was the purpose of my adding it to the agenda, to raise the issue again. And
but the the challenge, Howard, is that county staff's not going to know anything about this. And it really isn't a county government issue. It's kind of out of our hands.
Okay.
It is an
Okay.
interaction with the federal government. So we'll only be following it. The real action and decisions are going to be made by components that barely even recognize that we exist.
But the we could advise the Board of Supervisors though too. Should there be a legitimate reason
I
for
think
trails and sidewalk connectivity?
trails and sidewalks connectivity. Yeah, I guess you're right. Yes.
For 21% of the bridge, of which Virginia owns, so we can advise them for 21%.
Right.
I'm just kidding.
But
No,
it's
we
VDOT that owns
do
it,
hear
not
about that project. So, as staff, I'm sure Nicole will tell you, we do hear about that project. It's just not in the same design level that the I-495 next project is. It's behind that project. So it's not quite fully designed yet. I don't even think it's preliminary designed yet. So we're getting
Well,
there.
that's maybe when it's too late.
Yeah.
Might be too late if the concept isn't even baked.
I would agree. It's the classic case of it's either too early or too late, and so there is a danger there. But again, it's not a Virginia issue at this point. It's the Maryland side of the bridge. So
I thought it was on the Virginia side.
no. This is on the Maryland side. The connection
both sides.
Well,
it's on both sides. So there are connectivity issues on both sides with the National Park Service. To the Potomac Heritage Trail on our end, and then the towpath on the other side.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
While our connectivity issues are not as severe because we do have a low stress route that connects, which is not that far away. That's a current connection to the trail. But on the other end, there will be a pretty significant gap on the Maryland side. But it does affect Fairfax County pedestrian and cyclists that try to access the towpath, and also, the places the towpath leads to, like Georgetown and other, it's a commuter route that is also affected.
Yes, there's a real risk of building a bridge to nowhere.
Or making it, yes. So could we maybe add that to the agenda for next month too?
Don't call it like that though, otherwise they will take the path off the bridge. I mean, that would we definitely want the path on the bridge, but we just want to improve the connectivity to that path.
To the national park.
Yes. To the bicycle facility that's on the other side. Okay. Getting into the list of active unresolved issues, the Braddock Road Improvement Project status. We have a website address for the government projects, the presentation. I haven't seen much change in that project, much as I dislike what we're doing, but are there any radical changes to that project? I mean, it's still pretty much spotter improvements, remove the crosswalks, put one pedestrian bridge up. Any radical changes to it?
Lauren, you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
So this is the Braddock Road Improvement Project that has spot improvements up and down Braddock Road. Much of it is a bike path project on both sides of Braddock Road, plus a pedestrian bridge, rather expensive pedestrian bridge. So this is probably one of the most prominent trails project on the VDOT agenda after I-66 bike path and a few other things. But its design seems to be fairly well set, and I'm not seeing any movement or change or any issue with regards to this. Is there anything happening with that project that the committee needs to know about?
We haven't had any updates in the last couple of months. We agree that there's some concerns. We've seen a lot of different alternatives, particularly at the two major intersections with Burke Lake and with Rolling. And we also have concerns about the pedestrian bridge and the lack of likely use of the pedestrian bridge. It was originally intended to go to a park and ride facility where that people would actually be accessing at the same level on the south side. But now it's just a freestanding bridge and there's no good pedestrian generators, and people have to go up and down ramps or stairs on both ends. So it's not, it's no longer really a great location for a pedestrian bridge. We want to see a good crossing at grade. So we've seen an alternative with an acceptable crossing at grade, and then a few alternatives with not acceptable crossings at grade. So that's where it's been, you know, since the fall, and I haven't seen any change.
That is interesting, because first of all, I salute you for that. I've been saying this for 2 years now. But as soon as they did away with the park and ride, I said, this makes no sense, right? But generally, this project had huge momentum. This is an expensive bridge. But as I read the public documents on this, this is a completely different. I'm glad you're rethinking it. But that's not what's showing up. That bridge is in every plan. A very foolishly designed bridge with, I think, stairways up and down. There's no room for ramps. I mean, there's a dozen reasons why. What are you thinking? So I'm glad you guys are rethinking it. I'd be happy to re-engage. I have some ideas about where you might be able to put a nice bridge, but anyway. So is it possible?
No, we've been asked to provide supporting information as to why a bridge wouldn't be necessarily the best choice in this location. So we have provided that, and then I don't know where, you know, Fairfax County, because it's managed by another project manager on our end, and MDOT stand in terms of working those details out.
See, that's, I think, a problem, because while it is intersection improvements, I would say if you divide up the cost of this whole project, the vast majority of the expense with regards to this project is associated with, especially if you had a bridge, with the bridge and the trail, sidewalks, and bikeways component of it, because you're going to put multi-use trails on both sides of Braddock Road for something like 3 miles, something like that, quite a ways. And it's not being managed by the Ped Bike parts of FCDOT. So your commenters, they're asking you questions about it, and I'm just concerned, and I've expressed my concerns all along, that this is becoming a poorly planned investment, in the sense that, is it a recreational trail? Of course not. It's along Braddock Road. So this is some sort of transportation trail, two big transportation trails, so what's your design purpose? Transportation trails that are interrupted and across the road at grade and a variety of other things are not really useful for transportation. So I have some basic questions about the underlying design purpose and philosophy of all this. I don't want to shut it off because it's a very important improvement, but we got to get rid of the design inconsistencies in this, and have a common design purpose for this, which has to be transportation. This is not a recreation trail. Beth has plenty of wonderful recreation trails, one of which connects with this. This is not something everybody's going to use like on a Sunday afternoon to ride along Braddock Road.
Yeah, we did advise that the underpass at that lovely recreation trail is a suitable location for an underpass, because there is something at grade there. You know, there is a facility that's already in place where it makes sense to keep something at that grade below the roadway. Just in response to
You
your
recommend, I'm sorry, let me be sure, you recommend that it is a good idea?
for the underpass at the trail, yes. Yeah. It wouldn't make sense there to make people come up to the roadway to cross, right? They're already at the lower grade. So just to respond to your comment about the staff and the management, you know, every project at this point in the division, in the department has a significant pedestrian and bicycle component, and our team can't take on the workload to manage every project with a significant pedestrian and bicycle component. So we do provide that, you know, subject matter expert advisory role, but we aren't taking on that management for any project right now. So yeah, I've been attending every meeting for this project, but I haven't been kept up to date in the last 2 to 3 months of what's happened since we did give our subject matter expertise opinion on the reconsideration of the pedestrian bridge.
Okay, so I won't waste the committee's time on this anymore, but I will communicate with you. I'll make sure you know what I've said about this and my suggestions. So, anybody else have any comments on this particular issue? Sorry to. Let's see, Sean, go ahead.
I actually had a comment not on this issue, so I can wait just a moment. It's also 9 o'clock.
Yes, I know. Bob?
Well, I think it's good that we took a look at this time, because they're still, you know, working on this project, and there are, as we have, you know, documented in previous meetings going back even a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when they had the first public round of meetings on the upgrade from the task force. So I think if you can coordinate with Lauren and others on the FCDOT staff, you know, to sort of express the concerns you have, which I think some of us on the committee certainly have, and as a Braddock District Rec, I do. I know that the whole purpose was to allow more traffic to go down Braddock Road without widening it. And so they're going to have, you know, interchange and ingress, egress points modified. I know there's concerns with crosswalks, where they are, and, you know, are they going to be safe and useful and so forth. So if we re-engaged on this, maybe we can have some input as the process goes on, which I think is going to include a little bit more public outreach and hearings, you know, sponsored by the Braddock District Supervisor and so forth, because we're not quite there, but maybe we're getting closer, and we want to make sure it's good. And I do agree that bridge would not serve any function whatsoever except to waste a lot of taxpayer money.
And I think it is good to continue to hear from you all and from the public, because there is a hesitation from VDOT and also probably from us that we shouldn't be reopening cans of worms that we've already decided on. So, you know, if we said and we agreed with people that we were going to have this bridge, now we're taking it away. It's helpful to hear from the other end of it, that, you know, maybe we thought it was a good idea at one point, but we no longer think it is, or whatever, as a community, because that is often what we hear, like that, well, we already committed to doing this.
Yes, and I can fill you in on this. They think so, but there were some flaws in that whole process. So let me put it that way. So not all voices were heard, I think. We've killed that issue. Sean.
So this 2 very quick things. One, we got a notification that the Burke Center VRE Trail is having a ribbon cutting ceremony on Sunday, March 20th at 2 p.m. With a meeting point at 10400 Premier Court in Burke. And so that's good news. Another nice new connector trail that actually will connect to some of the park trails, even though this is an FCDOT trail.
This is an FCDOT trail? Okay.
This is an FCDOT trail, but it connects to the VRE on the west side of the Burke Center VRE train station. I also have a request. which is I would like an update on the rolling road. It's a widening project, but I hate the fact that they're widening it. I would like an update on that project, please, from staff if possible.
The trails associated with it, right?
Sure, yes.
Yeah, can we get back to you next month on that also? Because I don't know where the stats of that off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, not right now. This is
Yeah,
for
okay.
future, for sure.
Sure.
Not. This is just a request, and yeah, no, I'm opposed to the widening of it, but I like the trails. Anyhow, but for next month, thank you, or another month.
Okay, so any other urgent last thoughts?
I did want to say that next month, if you'd still like, I offered to present on the Safe Streets for All program, similar to we provided next steps to the Board Transportation Committee last month, if you all want to hear about that. If you don't, or you want to do it later, we can skip it.
I don't think we have anything specifically scheduled for next month.
Okay,
Bob,
sorry. David indicated that you all were looking for that, so.
Yes, so let's do that. Safe Streets,
Okay.
Safe Streets for All. Let's book that.
How long would you need, Lauren, for the purposes of the agenda?
The presentation would only be about 10 minutes long, and then we can have Q&A.
Okay, thank you. Great. Yeah, that'll be good.
Move to adjourn.
So moved. Second?
Second.
The meeting is adjourned at 9:06 p.m. and we'll see everybody next month.